Hey guys, welcome back to Watch to Read. As always, I'm Connor, and I'm joined by
Erica.
And this is the podcast where we read a book, and we watch the movie / miniseries. We do want to do those eventually, and discuss the merits of both mediums and the adaptation, and which we prefer.
And today we're doing Annihilation by Jeff VanderMeer, and I guess directed by
Written and directed
by Alex Garland. This is one that I heavily pushed Connor into doing for the podcast because I am a big proponent of the book over the movie in this case.
There are definitely merits to both.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like this is definitely, of the episodes we've done, the most different, the most distinct of an adaptation.
Yeah.
Which I have the quote regarding that choice being made. We can talk about later when we get to the movie or whenever, but this is the first time where a purposeful choice was made to not be literal to the text.
Outside of, I'm assuming, Garland's opinion on what was good about the book and what wasn't good about a book.
Garland has an affinity for the book. He just wanted to get to the key feeling of reading the book, which he felt was kind of like this dreamlike nature, and that's why he chose to have his adaptation come from kind of a remembrance or a dreamlike state as opposed to a literal going beat by beat of the novel. But speaking of the novel, let's talk about the novel Annihilation by Jeff Garland. I fucked that up. No, Jeff VanderMeer. Sorry. Speaking of novels, let's talk about...
I think you should leave that in, but...
You think so?
I think that's funny, yeah.
Okay, yeah, we'll keep it in then.
But yeah, Annihilation by Jeff VanderMeer is a book that I read back in 2020. At that time, it was, I think, the only series I've ever read. I'm a very standalone kind of girl. I don't get into series. I don't delve into them, really. When I read this, I ended up binging the entire trilogy. I read them all back to back. It's a very short little novel, less than 200 pages. Something of this length, I think, works really well for a movie because you're not having to chop out a ton of scenes. You know, when you read American Psycho or Valley of the Dolls, there's a lot of context there that you just don't have time to put into a movie. And it has a couple awards to it. First of all, the 2014 Nebula Award for Best Novel, and also the Shirley Jackson Best Novel Award. So people liked it back in the day. The Nebula is specifically for science fiction works.
And Shirley for horror?
No, I'm not sure it's just for horror. I think it's just kind of an awards
for
that's
genre.
done in her name.
Yeah.
This is another novel that was picked up before it was even published for adaptation.
Was it picked up by Garland?
That I'm unsure of.
Okay.
I know it was picked up in 2013. Which I don't even understand how that works. I don't. It was in 2013, so we kind of, I feel like we're riding the wave of dystopian, apocalyptic genres.
It's weird to think Bridesmaids and Hunger Games played a part maybe in this movie existing, but it could be, I mean, makes sense. Because on paper, ironic statement, it's literally written on paper. But on paper, like, the premise is interesting. And I understand very quickly why someone would want to make an adaptation of this. And we'll obviously address that further down the line, my opinions on the adaptation. Right. But it makes clear sense that you would hear this premise and think, okay, this could be a very intriguing science fiction movie and maybe something that you get someone like Natalie Portman to sign on to.
Yeah. The novel follows 4 women that go into this zone called Area X, and it's a bit of an anomaly as to what exactly is going on. There's a lot of people that go in, but very few people come back out, and the people that do come back out are not the same, either mentally or physically. Our main character, who is never named, that's a factor of these books, is our characters are never named, and that's a strategic choice on VanderMeer's part, I think, to make things very sterile. Our main character discusses that openly about how they're even instructed to not use each other's names because they don't want to build any sort of emotional attachment to each other. Their main focus is on learning about the environment, not each other. So it kind of is a strategy for them to not worry about, someone's family, just worry about figuring out what's going on. So we follow these 4 women into this area that's strange, to say the least, I guess. It opens on them really finding what the biologist calls the tower, which to everyone else in the group is really more of a tunnel.
They spend a lot of time on that distinction. I understand the tunnel tower situation where you're showing the separation in ideology between the biologist and the psychologist and the anthropologist and the surveyor, which are our 4 women.
That's interesting because I don't even think about that, but that's interesting.
I think it's a change of perspective is how I view it.
That's fair. And I see where you get that from because there does seem to be some distinction between the biologist and all of the other characters, which, like you said, we have an anthropologist, a psychologist, and a surveyor. Mm-hmm. And that's all they're ever known as in the book to us. But I took it as kind of a mirroring of the lighthouse, but because it has like the spiraling stairs like a lighthouse would, and the different kind of sections of it, like how the lighthouse has different sections of it. And then we eventually come to find out that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, mimicking if you were to look up into the top of a lighthouse. But that's just my interpretation of it, and I think that's part of what is interesting about this book, is there's some room for interpretation.
It's a kind of a hard book to talk about neatly.
Yes.
Especially when you get to the climax, because it is so abstract at the end.
The first time I finished this book, this is the only book I've ever stayed up into the night to read. Never done that before with a book. But I just had such a visceral reaction to what was going on, and it just pulls you in. But that's my opinion. Yeah, how do you want to dig into this?
I don't know. It's a hard book to dig into.
I can do a vague play-by-play, that's what I take with my notes.
Let's do like a vague play-by-play.
Like we said, we start with this group of women a few days after they've crossed into the border of Area X. The biologist informs the reader that they were put under hypnosis in order to cross the border. And hypnosis plays a pretty big part within this book about things that end up happening to our characters, which the psychologist is the hypnotist in this case, as part of the strategy, I think, to make people more subservient and cooperative, has been instructed to use short phrases that will get people to do the most optimum thing for the situation, whether that is to go down into the tunnel or to die, essentially. Which I'll spoil it now. That's what annihilation means.
Yeah, annihilation is the code word she uses to
incite immediate suicide.
Yeah, there you go.
I remember when I read that reveal of what annihilation really means, and it was just so eerie. They find this tower, and they decide to go inside of it.
And a vast majority of the text, I feel like, is spent inside of this tower.
I don't remember who all goes down.
The first time it's all three of them, and the psychologist stays behind both times, I believe.
Yeah, the psychologist is always staying up at the top. I remember she uses some sort of hypnotic phrase again to kind of encourage them, because everyone has opinions and what they think is the safest, and through this hypnosis, everyone's on the same page and does what's best for the company. Like I said, there's multiple levels. The first level's pretty normal, I would say, and then once they get down to the second level, they find that there are these fungi, spores all along the walls of it, and it's made into this giant run-on sentence, essentially, which is very intriguing because it obviously makes them want to continue going down into the tower to figure out what exactly is being said. But kind of one of, I guess, the inciting incidents is these spores bursting into the biologist's face, and she inhales the spores, and this affects her in that she is immune to the hypnosis, and she quickly realizes what's happening within the group. Each member of the group is instructed to keep this journal about their experience as sort of research into what the experience inside of Area X is like. The biologist keeps the fact that the spores burst into her face to herself, because that's kind of what I was getting to with the journals, is that there's this underlying feeling that you don't want everyone else to know how you're feeling or what you're thinking for whatever reason.
There's an underlying distrust.
Yeah, there's a big distrust, and I don't know if that comes from the biologist knowing that the psychologist is hypnotizing people, or with that small of a group, it's very easy to kind of choose sides and be like, oh, well, she's unstable. She is losing her mind. She's losing her grip on reality. We gotta kind of like...
They purposely limit their trust in each other.
Right.
And I think they do that for a reason, obviously, because if someone tries to dissuade someone else from the mission, their reaction will be, oh, I know blank. They're right.
And I mean, we come to find out pretty soon after that the lack of trust is for a good reason. We know the psychologist is hypnotizing them, but the next morning they wake up and the anthropologist isn't there anymore. And not really much explanation off the bat, but the psychologist later informs our other two members of the group, the biologist and the surveyor, that she wanted to leave. As far as they know at this moment in time, the anthropologist just left Area X. She went home. And so They go back down into the tunnel, and they go a lot deeper down this time, and eventually they discover the anthropologist's body down there. And we discover that she wasn't alone down there. There's 2 sets of footprints, one being hers, one being presumably the psychologist's.
Now, at that time, we also learned that she was getting a sample from whatever the creature was that was writing these words in the fungus.
Yes, because as the further they go down into the tower, the fresher the words appear to be for whatever reason. And the biologist sees things differently than the surveyor is. You know, she can see the spores shimmering. She can see the walls breathing. She can hear even the heartbeat of this tower. Something I have in my notes here that I wanted to point out, and I don't know if you've ever read The Yellow Wallpaper. You ever read The Yellow Wallpaper?
No.
Okay. It's kind of this, I believe, follow-up to Jane Eyre and the Mad Woman.
Another book I haven't read yet.
Well, The Mad Woman in the Attic. Do you not know what happens to Jane Eyre?
No. I know that Fassbender and Mia Wasikowska are in the movie, directed by Cary Fukunaga, but that's my extent.
Okay. Well, spoiler alert. Part of Jane Eyre is Jane discovering that the man that she is falling in love with, if not marrying, I'm not really sure, actually has a previous wife chained up in his attic, claiming that she has gone mad. And there's a couple mentions of wallpaper in this book that I didn't know if it was possibly a reference to The Yellow Wallpaper. I don't know. Automatically, whenever I'm reading from a female perspective and wallpaper is mentioned, I'm like, oh, the yellow wallpaper.
It's a metaphor for insanity.
Because she sees it in the words in the tower, and then I think she's talking about it in reference to her mother's painting. Her mother was an artist, and I think she makes comment that her paintings looked like wallpaper or something like that. And so I thought that was interesting. I mean, I don't know. I just,
That's interesting. That's obviously
it
something
is
I didn't
because
know about,
you don't really know what is going on with the biologist here. We don't know how much of it is all in her head because of what happens to her with the spores. One could argue she is an unreliable narrator. I don't like that trope. I tend to want to believe the narrator.
It works in certain texts, like Fight Club. I feel like is a very good unreliable narrator text.
Yeah, there's times when it's good, and there's times when it's just like, oh, but does anything mean anything?
Is anything real?
Yeah. But that was just something I wanted to point out. It stops after those 2 references, I believe, but it just was something that stood out to me.
They discovered that she got a sample from what eventually became known as the crawler.
That sample eventually reveals that the crawler that they assume is making these writings on the wall is made of human brain cells. And this is around the time, too, that we finally get it revealed that her husband was on the previous mission into Area X. And he came home about a year after he went in without any memory of how he got out. He's kind of just a shell of himself, essentially.
Has changed. She used to be this gregarious, like, funny, out there guy, and now he's just very reserved and quiet, answering questions like in one-word sentences kind of thing.
Yeah. But anyway, he gets taken away by the Southern Reach Company, and she is later told that he has inoperable terminal cancer, and he eventually dies 6 months later. So, in total, he's from a year and 6 months after entering Area X, he is dead. He's not the only one. This happens to a lot of the other people in his group as well. That's how we end up figuring out that our biologist actually volunteered to go into the area based on her husband, based on what happened there. But yes, so that's revealed to us. Obviously, that's not revealed to the surveyor who she's down in the tower with. They resurface, and this is when the biologist reveals to the surveyor that the psychologist is using hypnosis on them, and she knows this because she's witnessed it happening to them. And she's immune to it, But the surveyor is a bit of a stubborn one and doesn't really want to believe her about a lot of things. She's hesitant to go along with what the biologist is saying. So they end up splitting paths, really. The surveyor stays at the camp, and the biologist decides to go to the lighthouse. That's the only place she can think that the psychologist would have gone. We come across this Pompeian-esque village that is kind of frozen in time when Area X overtook it.
Obviously, it does play into one of the themes of the book we discussed in our discussion pre-recording about nature and nature overtaking what man has already kind of taken from nature.
Yes, yeah. We've had a couple encounters at this point too, I will say, since this comes up in the movie, with these animals that aren't quite right. in this section of the book, she sees a dolphin that she says has a human-like eye to it and almost looks familiar to her. She gets to the lighthouse and she discovers that it looks like there's been a lot of violence there. Eventually, at the top, she finds a trapdoor which holds not only the psychologist's belongings, but also a huge pile of journals, which are obviously the journals of previous expeditions into Area X. And she starts rifling through. First, she kind of, was looking through them and just, trying to get any information she can from these journals. But then she's like, there's hundreds of them here. You realize then also that the company has been lying to you and that there's been a lot more people that have gone in and not come out than what you're being told. She finds her husband's, and then she finds the psychologist at the bottom of the lighthouse, which we find out when she goes down to talk to her that the psychologist actually tried to jump.
She felt compelled to jump because something was going after her. The psychologist, having sustained injuries from her fall, she doesn't kill her, that she just dies naturally because she's already been there for close to a day. The biologist looks through her stuff, finds the journal, and then heads back to where the surveyor has stayed at camp.
I have a little bit of a gunfight on the way back. The biologist is injured, is shot, but her wound is healing itself.
She has like a matrix bullet time and takes out the surveyor.
Yes, the surveyor is taken out. She kind of has heightened senses at this point too. Like she can feel things on the ground almost animalistically in a way that we just can't. And she goes back down into the tower and faces the crawler, which is the moment in the book which is just so overwhelming for my brain.
It is a very interesting passage, very engaging piece of writing. And I think VanderMeer is a very talented author. I don't want me to give criticism of that moment and it come across like I'm saying VanderMeer is a fucking quack or something. That's not the case. I think he's a very talented guy. And
I also don't think he cares what you say about him.
No, he doesn't give two fucks. Nor should he. But my point is I don't want someone listening to this who's a Vanderhead like you to think like I'm talking shit, because I'm not.
Yeah.
And also, I lived with Eric before we recorded. I want to work in this industry someday.
Yeah, he told me to not say bad things about Alex Garland.
So I don't want... I'm not that I'm like trying to censor Erica. But it's just the thing where it's like, I got to be careful what I say if you want to be a young working professional.
So get to your point here.
My point is, I think that passage, there is so much going on that it is sometimes... And I get we're supposed to feel the biologist's confusion and that overwhelming feeling in that moment. It's nearly incomprehensible what is happening, at least to me.
But I just find that part of the book I just love it. It just makes my brain light on fire.
Yeah, it has that effect and it works. But I'm saying, if I had to boil down my complaint with that section, that there's only so many times a writer can describe the thing we're supposed to be seeing in our mind's eye as like it's indescribable.
Yeah, well, like I said, like I understand exactly where you're coming from, because that's a part that I last night I especially remember having to go back and kind of reread that to kind of digest it twice. It's so bright and it's so loud in my head. All I hear is really the music at the end of Annihilation. If you watch that movie and you know the end and you know what score they use, it is what it sounds like to me. It just is overwhelming inside of your skull. And that's how I feel when I read it. It's overwhelming and exhausting. But that's pretty much the end of the book too. It's like she goes down there and sees the crawler, and she herself crawls back out, and she is now kind of a part of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of what happens in this book is the people that go into Area X become a part of Area X. That's why we have that, what she kind of talks about at the end of the book, is the dolphin with the human-like eye. She's like, maybe that was my husband. Maybe that's why it was so familiar to me. She's like, my husband is still down there. Which the part we skipped over was the doppelgangers. She discovers in her husband's journals that there are doppelgangers that are somehow created in this environment. And she was like, well, maybe the one that came back is not my initial husband. That's why he was different.
But when the husband dies of cancer, obviously he's still in control of the Southern Reach. And it probably wasn't cancer in the way we perceive it. It was a creature that was born inside Area X, unable to survive outside of it.
That's possible too, kind of an ET-esque situation.
yeah, exactly. Where its cells are devolving because it's not in the environment that it was born to thrive in.
I did want to talk a little bit about what exactly this book is saying, because it gets into why I don't care for the movie adaptation of it, because I think the movie says much less. I think it's an ode or a love story to nature and to the beauty in nature's chaos and the stuff that is unexplainable about nature that we can try and understand, which is part of also what I think it's about, which is our relationship to nature and our desire to understand it and to colonize it and to conquer it. This company sends groups to try to live inside of this area and to understand it, how we ourselves as humans are part of nature, you know, and the uncomfortability that humans feel in that because we don't understand it.
Because we can't control it.
Because we can't control it. And we, like I said, we don't understand every aspect of nature. And that's why I don't like the movie, because I think the movie does not talk about that at all.
Back in 2017, this movie came out. I watched an interview with Garland where he talked about the adaptation process. And he said, the book to me always felt like a dream. So I wrote the adaptation in that way, where I did not reread the text. I basically adapted it from memory. Mm-hmm. And I have a more actual, like, in his words approach I found from an article today. This is a direct quote from Garland as opposed to my very loose misquoting. Instead of going back and rereading it, underlining passages, I did an adaptation from my experience of having read it. I thought that was the way to be faithful to the thing that I experienced the most strongly, which was its dreamlike nature. And you, not to put words in your mouth, and I don't know if you want to go this path, because I did tell you not to talk shit about Garland, but you feel it's disrespectful to the text to some extent.
I will say in some of the research I did before, said that he did have basically VanderMeer's blessing to do the movie this way. So my point really doesn't matter, other than that I think it does a disservice to the text, and I don't think that adaptations have to be page for page. I love Alex Garland's other work, and I don't even hate this movie. I just really don't support his choice of adapting the novel in that way.
Yeah, it kind of actually goes back, honestly, to what we talked about with the adaptation from Cabin in the World to Knock at the Cabin last episode, where I addressed with my issue with Shyamalan not including some of the more core themes I felt of the novel. And like I said, anytime you adapt something, each different person connects to a work for a different reason. Yeah. I don't have issues with the adaptation. I don't think the movie is a perfect text either. I do have big issues with it, and I understand some of those issues do come from things I don't think are issues in the book. Mm-hmm. I do think as a result of him just being a very talented screenwriter and kind of knowing how a feature film functions, I do think the movie becomes more streamlined and, for lack of a better term, more commercial than the book is.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't need book adaptations to be page for page. I just think that there's a way to adapt the book faithfully, but also in a way that is marketable and is enjoyable as a movie.
What I compare it to, what a lot of people compared the movie to, at least when I was in film school at the time, a movie we're probably going to cover on this show eventually, dreading it very much so, Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker. So much of that movie takes place not really underground, but in these very, like, stark, gray-walled, like, underground rooms filled with sand.
And it's ironic you say this because it's one of my favorite movies.
I know.
And you don't like it.
I couldn't stay conscious during it. But
such a good movie.
No offense to Tarkovsky, I need to give him a second chance.
You do. He's a master.
The novel feels a lot more akin to Stalker. And I think a more literal adaptation of Annihilation could very well work. But I think it does go into that realm now where it is a lot less commercial than Garland ended up doing. And I think it is a movie that I don't think could get made today. If that movie was, the book was written in like the 70s, I think you could have had a very interesting Stalker-esque adaptation where it's a very cerebral approach.
I want to see that.
I think that's where this text would have thrived. And it's not like Stalker was like setting the town on fire in the US. But I doubt that. I do think that was the time frame that kind of text could have been successful, and I think we're kind of coming around now, or I think around this time, I think that kind of thing could function at like an A24 or Blumhouse, with like a smaller scale, but could still be like not necessarily like marketable, but could find a home.
I will say VanderMeer commented on this and said that the novel is 100% not an ode in any way to Roadside Picnic, which Stalker is based on, or Stalker itself.
Yeah.
So, needless to say, the movie is different.
It is different, yeah.
There's a lot more interaction with animals in Area X than there is in the book. We have the alligator,
the deer,
and
the bear.
The classic bear that everyone loves so much, I think is decent.
I've softened on it a lot on the most recent viewings. Mm-hmm. When I saw this, I thought it was like the bee's knees.
Yeah.
Film school is not worth the money, I would say. But at the very least...
You heard it here first, ladies.
I know, shocking. And I say this to anyone who asks me, was it worth it? I always say, maybe not. But what other time are you going to have 4 years to just watch movies and make friends? And that's what film school was.
Yeah.
And as a result, my taste has expanded so drastically. So a movie I saw in 2018 that I thought was the bee's knees, because very cool visuals, great Oscar Isaac, Natalie Portman performances, has softened a lot because I've seen a lot more shit, including Stalker. I had not yet seen Stalker at that point. The fact is, when I saw Stalker, I jokingly said to my professor, "Oh, like Annihilation."
So there's no bear. There's no bear in the book.
Yeah, there's no bear in the book. The book, a lot of flora, not enough fauna.
Oh, yeah. Also, the movie implies that an asteroid caused this.
Yes, the movie directly does tell you it is aliens.
Yeah, I mean, we have Natalie Portman as our biologist, Jennifer Jason Leigh as our psychologist, Gina Rodriguez as...
the role of the surveyor, but her role has changed.
Yeah.
And then we have
Tessa Thompson
as the pseudo-archaeologist, pseudo-anthropologist.
Yes.
And then I feel bad I don't know this actress's name, who plays the pseudo-linguist.
Tuva Novotny. Yeah, so those are our main...
Those are main 4.
Girls that go in. And then obviously we have Oscar Isaac, who is Kane.
No offense to Alex Garland. Very talented screenwriter, as I've acknowledged. That does feel like, what do we name the tough military guy? Kane. And also, shout out to Sony Masuno, who is in all of Alex Garland's work. She's the best. She's in a minute of this movie, maybe.
No, Connor. She's the alien at the end.
She also does the mocap for the alien. That's true. We get a little bit of Natalie Portman. She's a professor at Johns Hopkins, as opposed to a studying
just general
biologist.
Scientist. Yeah.
She was in the military for 7 years before, and that's where she met her husband, Kane. When they take him, they also sedate her and take her to Area X, which you get a nice title card in the movie of Area X. And that is where Ventress, who is a psychologist played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, basically informs her, does the exposition dump of what this is, what the shimmer is, what we think caused it, why Kane was there, all that jazz. And eventually leads into her meeting the other 3 members. And
because she wants to go in.
She wants to go in.
She also does volunteer for this, too. She goes to Ventress and is like, hey,
yeah,
I might as well go.
Deciding to keep her relationship to Kane a secret, because that is important to the movie later on. And basically, they run into the alligator, which attacks Tessa Thompson's character, and then finally Natalie Portman is able to kill it. And that's where they see the first signs of what they call the shimmer affecting the creatures and kind of mixing their DNAs to form something else. And eventually they find their way to a facility where the previous group, which Kane was a part of, was taking shelter. And they find a memory card which shows Kane cutting open one of the other, I'm assuming also military, and showing that his organs are shifting around like snakes inside of him. Yeah.
Which I think this part is much scarier to me than the actual bear is.
Yes.
I know people always talk about the bear, but no one talks about that facility and the tape and watching that found footage and then going down to the pool within the same facility and seeing where the guy is and what he looks like now, which is great production-wise. They did fantastic on that, but then also like finding the knife in the water and just being like, okay, I'm good now.
Later that night, we see that Lena, Natalie Portman's character, has taken a sample of her blood. Seeing under the microscope, she's seen that it's begun to split and evolve, and that the shimmer is also mixing with her.
Right, which is similar to the book.
Yes. Later that night, Tess is taken by the bear, which causes Gina Rodriguez's character and Tessa Thompson's character to want to leave.
Yeah.
And it's revealed to us that Lena is dishonest with them, telling them, well, it'd be quicker to get to the coast and find a way out than backtrack. Gina Rodriguez's character is beginning to kind of lose her marbles a little bit, and she's seeing that her palm and fingerprints move as she watches them. And this paranoia leads her to discover that Lena, Natalie Portman, actually did have that connection to Kane. And she knocks out and ties up the other 3 ladies and is about to kill Natalie Portman before she hears what she believes to be Cass's voice screaming for help.
Mm-hmm. Which this is all taking place in that kind of Pompeian-esque village that we also see in the novel, where everyone's kind of frozen as these plants. Or it's hard to say whether or not these people are frozen as plants or if the plants have formed into human shapes.
Yeah, it could be both. It could be the people have died there, and now the plants have kind of taken up their form.
Yeah.
Gina Rodriguez runs out to try to save Cass, and before she comes back, we hear a scuffle, and then the bear comes in, and basically it has evolved or mixed, I guess, generally with the shimmer to now half of its face is just a skull. After killing Cass, it has kind of like absorbed her voice as part of its growl.
Right, because it ate her
vocal cords. Yeah. Which is
very cool. I won't deny that, sequence.
Yeah. They kill the bear, but not before it kills Gina Rodriguez. Her adventures go forth while Tessa Thompson decides to stay there and kind of
one with the plants, literally.
Yes. Yeah, we see the plants begin to grow out of her self-harm scars. And then she walks away, and Natalie Portman follows her, but she eventually is lost and has becomes one of the plants. Mm-hmm. And basically, long story short, they go to the lighthouse.
She gets inside, and there is kind of these burn marks on one side of the lighthouse's wall, and this burned body sitting in front of it. And she goes over to kind of inspect it and see what's going on, and then quickly realizes that there's this camcorder facing the body. She discovers on that tape is her husband, Kane, sitting down in front of the wall, kind of in these ramblings of talking about how he doesn't really know who he is anymore, or sounding like he's also kind of lost himself to the shimmer. He asks, like, have you ever seen a phosphorus bomb? It's pretty bright, you probably should turn away. And he holds the bomb in his hand and pulls the pin, and it goes off, and he sets himself on fire. And then from the left side of the camcorder screen, we see Oscar Isaac walk in, basically insinuating that there is some sort of a double. Yeah, she goes down into, there's basically this opening in the floor of the tower, which looks not man-made, but maybe alien-made, and it's kind of like you're inside of, I don't know, this creature or machine, really, and that's where she finds the psychologist, and her kind of succumbing to the shimmer and not being herself, and she eventually turns into what I really envision the crawler to be, which is this kind of just orb of moving light and sound, which eventually turns into the humanoid that we see. We eventually watch it turn into her in this kind of interpretive dance.
What I think is interesting is, I don't know if Lena thought this through, but the moment she's able to actually set off the grenade is when the creature has finally became her, so it's no longer mirroring her. That's when she's able to get away.
That's true. Yeah, because that's interesting. I didn't really think about that, because I noticed, I was like, oh, okay, so now it just happens to stop mirroring her, and...
Yeah. It's finally become her. It's done learning.
Yeah.
It's done observing. And the second it's it's done observing, the first thing it does as its own volition is just look down at this thing as it goes off.
We see the whole place explode, really, don't we?
Yeah. When the creature dies, basically the personification of the shimmer, the whole thing collapses within itself. And then we get basically to the beginning of the movie we haven't really talked about with Natalie Portman, the narrative device of her in this chamber talking to the Benedict Wong character about her recounting her narrative inside the shimmer.
Yeah, what went on and stuff like that.
And then she visits with Kane, who is now miraculously healed from whatever condition he was suffering through. And they hug each other And at that moment, both their eyes begin to shimmer, alluding that now the
shimmer is still in them in some capacity.
Despite being destroyed, there is still part of it that lives in them.
Yeah. And that's the movie.
That's Annihilation, baby.
Like I said, I don't dislike the movie. I think it's good. It's something that, like, if someone asked me, hey, should I watch that? I'd be like, yeah, sure.
It's a thing where they're so divorced from each other. It is really hard to say what is the adaptation stronger than the original text or vice versa. I think that they both have their strengths. Like Cabin at the End of the World, Knock at the Cabin, there is enough of a divide where I can't really say that a change is a weakness to either one.
Yeah, I don't know. I respect him because I do think he's got crazy ideas. He's got crazy ideas in that brain. And he wrote The Beach, which is fascinating to me. I can't see the broader message of this movie.
I don't think it's as thematically rich as a lot of the critics I've read claim it is.
Okay.
I think the movie is very strong. I think it's a 3.5 for me on Letterboxd for those who care about that kind of statistic.
It's a 3 for me.
Yeah, but I think the movie is strong in certain elements. I think there's a scene with Oscar Isaac and Natalie Portman in the beginning I think is some of the best acting I've seen from both those two performers. Both performers I really enjoy. I think the bear is incredible, and I really like the entire climax with the interpretive dance. I don't think it's as strong as people say it is, but I do think it is a worthy addition in the Alex Garland canon. And a movie I do enjoy. A movie I own on Blu-ray for a reason.
Did this come out before Ex Machina?
No, 3 years after.
Oh, well, never mind. Excuse me. Never mind. I was going to say, if it got him to make Ex Machina, I don't care.
No, he got to make this because of Ex Machina. The other way around.
Interesting. This was his blank check.
Well, I guess, yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Same thing with Oscar Isaac. Like, people are starting to know who he is now, fresh off of Inside Llewyn Davis, and Domhnall Gleeson about to do a Star War. I think it was a thing where he had enough of the star power in order to do that.
Yeah.
And that movie obviously was huge. People love Ex Machina, and that got him the blank check of Annihilation, and I think still kind of the blank check that he was writing through Devs and Men. FX is also just like the cable HBO, and they, even through the Disney acquisition, are really cool and allowing a lot of unique projects. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are going straight to Hulu, which sucks, but still allowing some really cool projects. Mm-hmm. But basically, digression to say, I like Alex Garland. I like this movie. I don't think it is strong as people say it is, but still a worthy addition to his filmography.
Yeah.
And he's still yet to make a stinker. Men is challenging, and I like that movie more than a lot of people do.
Yeah. This movie fits for him. It makes sense that he made it, and I'm glad someone made it. You know, I'm always honestly happy when a movie or when a book gets a film adaptation, because it always just increases sales, you know, and I'm glad that this is happening to Jeff VanderMeer, and did happen to him. You know, I think I don't know.
Despite the movie not being a commercial success.
Yeah, I don't really know how it works for authors when their movie gets made into, or when their book gets made into a movie. I don't know what kind of money, if any, they get out of it.
Like every financial thing in the entertainment industry, it depends how good of an agent you have and how good a contract you have.
Yeah.
So Erica, the age-old question, the one they came here for, which necessarily
that
is
I already
better.
Spoiled the answer for?
Yeah. You prefer the book. I'm kind of torn. I don't think the book... Yeah, it's one of those... They're too divorced from each other to really give, like, an honest opinion.
It's hard. It's hard.
I like the movie. I like the book a hair less. And that's, like, the most truthful and also helpfully diplomatic way to address it.
Yeah. Yeah, I obviously prefer the book. I see the merit in the movie, and like you said, it's almost like comparing apples and oranges, because they're just quite different. I will say I've watched the movie 4 times now. This is my second time reading the book. Every time I'm always like, yeah, the book's better. Overall, it's one that I would really recommend, like, doing this comparison for yourself with. I feel like a lot of people have watched Annihilation. Probably not as many people have read the book.
Thanks for listening, guys. As always, really appreciate you taking the time to listen and to... Hey, if you are the one person
that actually reads and then watches then listens.
I was gonna say that theoretically, Dan kind of does this loosely, but sees what we did for an episode and is like, oh shit, I have to read that book so I can watch that episode.
Yeah.
If you are someone who does that, cool. That's a level of connection and appreciation that
we do not expect.
We do not deserve.
But we appreciate it.
We very much appreciate it.
Let us know if you do it.
And we're hopefully going to get to a point where we tell you what we're reading next after while we're doing these episodes. But we just don't know yet. We have a couple ideas.
But something else will be coming.
Bye, guys. Thanks for listening. We appreciate you as always.